All right, today's notes are over domain and range. We're going to take a look at graphs and decide when it's increasing, decreasing, positive, negative, and the domain and range. Domain is the x values, right? Range, the y values. If you can't remember that, I just think about in alphabetical order. Right? Domain and range match with x and y. Okay, we struggle with that. So if you take these points, and I'm going to label them. We will not do this every time. I just kind of wanted to talk to you about it. If you try to label them every time, it would take forever. Just labeling a few. Okay, so I labeled a couple of the points. This would take forever, but it's a way to look at it. If we looked at it this way, the point right here, if I want to talk about domain, I'm talking about the x values, -3, -2, 0, and 2. So the smallest x value, okay, is what? What is the smallest x value we have? -3. Yes.
0, -1.
Oh, I labeled a different point. I'm sorry, guys. So it should be 1, -2. Thank you. Is that better? Okay, thank you. If we're going to look at the x values, we would be at -3, -2, 1, and 2. Those are all the x values, correct? What is the smallest x value we use in this picture? -3, right here. What's the biggest that we use? 2. But it would take a long time to label every point. Okay, so what we're going to do is, where did we decide that that was -2? What did we do? We counted over -3, didn't we? That's where we got it. Okay, so I went this far over. Where did we decide this was 2? I counted over 2 and then down, didn't I? Counted over here. The x values come from the x-axis. So a faster way, rather than labeling it all, finding the smallest x and the biggest x, is to just look at the x-axis. And wherever the picture is, trace it. So to get to this point right here, this one way up high, I had to count all the way to -3. And to get to this point way down here too, I had to count all the way to 2. So this is the window that I needed, isn't it? I had to go all the way to -3 to go up, and I had to go all the way to 2 to go down. Do you see it? So rather than labeling every point, just highlight this area you need, which would have been from, if you count, -3 all the way to 2. Okay. So the domain, we're going to use interval notation. The domain was from -3 to 2. The brackets, because they're closed circles. Now go to range. Range is the y-axis, how far you go up and down on y. So just look at the points right now. What's the biggest y point? 2. This is my biggest. I did 2, 1, -2, -3. When you write the range, you actually go from the bottom up. Just like you go smallest to biggest. So the smallest range value was way down here at -3. My biggest range value was up high, -3, -2, 1, and 2. Right? This is my biggest range. That was my highest point on the graph. Correct? So the lowest point was here. We went all the way up to the highest point here. So that was my window. The green. The green's my window. Low to high. What points are those? -3 all the way till 2. Okay, go to the next one, number 2. Domain and range. I'll give you 1 minute to try it on your own. Remember, they extend. So if you need to keep the arrows going, keep them going. okay? Domain are the x values. Keep in mind, this graph keeps going, doesn't it? Right? And in order for the graph to keep going, if I wanted to value, if I wanted to value way up here, don't have to extend the x-axis to get it. Because to find out what this ordered pair is, I'm going to have to count, okay, I went over 12 and up 12. So this is 12, 12, or whatever, correct? So then, staying on the negative. So what do you think my domain is? How many x's am I going to need if there's arrows on the end? Right. Okay, all real numbers is my domain, all the numbers. Or, I heard people say it too, you always go left to right when you write the domain. Smallest to biggest. Negative infinity all the way to infinity. Remember, use parentheses for infinity. What about the range? We sweep the range up. Bottom, the lowest, to the top. What's the lowest point on that graph? And we're talking about range, so you're going to find it on the graph. So I'm here, all the way up. Use from -4 all the ways. Correct? Because in order to get this point right here, I've got to go up however many this is to in order to find the point. Okay? So that would be, lowest would be -4 to the highest infinity. Notice -4 gets a bracket because at -4 it's a closed circle, it's not open. Domain and range. Correct? That's algebra 1. This is new. We're going to take a look at a picture. We have a parabola down here. We're going to take a look at a picture and decide, when is my picture increasing, when is it decreasing, when is it positive, and when is it negative. 4 attributes of graph. Okay? And adding domain and range. So to add to these, let me give you a definition. It's increasing, the way to remember it is x increases, y increases. When we've heard that before, what's it going to look like? As x increases, as x increases, y increases. And we call that a positive slope, don't we? Right? As x increases, y increases, it's a positive sloped line. Now go to decreasing. As x increases, what happens to y? Good, it decreases. We call that a negative slope. Okay, the last 2 vocabulary words we're going to look at is we're going to look at a picture, like this parabola. We're going to decide, when am I positive and when am I negative? Okay. A graph is considered to be positive when all the time it occurs above the x-axis. And it's negative anytime it's below the x-axis. For number 1, find me the domain and range. Okay, domain is looking at the x values. What do we know about them? If I'm going to continue these parabolas, these points, the x's have to continue on as well, correct? So it's all real numbers where we sweep across negative infinity to positive infinity. Go to the range. What's the smallest y value? Remember where we started at the bottom. What's the smallest? Okay, so -4 all the way to infinity. Okay, everybody, if you don't have a pencil, borrow one from a neighbor. We're going to need it today. Okay, because we're going to do a lot of erasing. We're going to draw and erase, draw and erase. So here's our first time. I want to ask where I'm increasing. Okay, there are 4 problems here. I've got increasing and decreasing. Okay, so let's take a look at this graph for a second. And the biggest mistake kids make is the arrows confuse them. when you're looking at a graph, pretend like your pencil is an airplane, all right? And you want to take your pencil and draw across the graph. Now watch, for example, what I'm talking about. If my pencil is an airplane and I'm coming across the page, if I follow the graph, I realize the arrows are going up. That doesn't mean that it's increasing. It doesn't mean it's got a positive slope. It's just showing you the direction it's going. Okay, so in fact, if the arrows confuse you, take the arrow off and start as high as you can. Take your pencil and go across the page with it. Which direction is my pencil going? Down. It's like an airplane, right? So here's my airplane coming across the page, right? And what's it going to do? It's going to go down, right? Then, once it gets down, so in this section right here, it's going to be considered decreasing. All of a sudden, though, what's going to happen when I go to the right hand of the graph? My airplane's going to take off. What do you call that line? Increasing. So the first question is, where am I increasing? So you come across the page with an airplane, I'm decreasing here, and then all of a sudden I switch, don't I? And now my airplane is increasing. So this part of the graph is increasing. So go ahead and do that. Lightly with your pencil, because we're about to erase it. That part is increasing. The question is, when am I increasing? Well, here's my issue. Do I tell people I'm increasing using the x values? Or do I tell people, how do I give people information about where that's at? For these four, increasing, decreasing, positive, we're always going to use the x value, domain. So where in the domain, okay, am I increasing? So what domain is increasing? If I'm going to do it's from 0, right? I'm going to look at the x-axis. I'm at 0 all the way. It's going to keep going. So from 0 to infinity, correct? You'll notice I'm using a parenthesis on that. The reason is because, look, I'm decreasing until I get to 0, and then I'm increasing at 0. Where does 0 belong? Kind of doesn't belong anywhere. Okay, so everything on these four are open circles. Okay, erase that, because now we're going to go move to decreasing. Shade where you think the picture's decreasing. Take your pencil across the paper, and where's your airplane landing? The airplane's landing here, in this whole section. And then use your x values to describe where you just shaded. And remember, you go left to right. You sweep across the page this way. So where am I the most negative? What are we going to call way over here? Keeps going, doesn't it? So, good. Negative infinity to where did I stop my shading? We're using x values to describe it. What's the farthest? 0. I see everybody. Good job. You guys have it. And now erase it. I wasn't kidding when I said you're going to need a big eraser today. Okay, positive and negative. Go back and look at your directions. Positive is above the x-axis. Shade where your picture is above the x-axis. Don't worry about an answer. Let's just figure out where I'm positive. How many spots am I positive in? This is different, isn't it? 2 spots, right? 2 different spots. So if you look on this side, we're going to describe this first using the domain. So this would be from negative infinity all the way to where are we stopping? Right here at negative 3. I'm positive over here, and I'm going to use a U for and. Where else and am I positive? I'll make a big hop. I'm positive here, correct? Which we're going to call that 3 all the way till infinity. Got it? Erase it. Shade where I'm negative. Shade your picture everywhere you're negative. That's actually a window. What 2 numbers will be negative in between? Remember, use the domain to describe it. Use the domain. So I'm going to go from negative 3 to 3. Oh, smallest to biggest. Okay, quickly, I'm going to try to finish this one. Ready? I'm going to skip domain range right now. Am I increasing at all? Wait a minute. Take my airplane. What am I doing right here? I'm going in the air. What am I doing over here? I'm landing. So I'm positive here. I'm increasing, I'm sorry. I'm increasing there. From negative infinity to where? To 0. Where am I decreasing? Where am I landing? Trace your airplane. here and here. Where am I landing? This side. Use your domain to describe it. 0 to what? Hang on. Am I positive at all? Am I above the x-axis anywhere? No. Am I negative? Am I below the x-axis? Where am I below the x-axis? The whole picture. Negative infinity to infinity. Okay. Now then, you guys, we're done for today, and we'll take our notes finishing tomorrow.